This video is brought to you by World of Warships. Kraków is Poland's second largest and arguably its most culturally significant city. For over 5 centuries it was the capital of the Polish kingdom after all, and the magnificent Kraków castle along the Vistula river was the royal residence. After King Sigismund III Wasa moved the capital to Warsaw in 1596, however, the city slowly but surely lost its importance. The city also suffered a lot during the several Swedish-Polish wars and subsequently saw a decline in the population. In 1795, finally, as part of the third partition of Poland, Kraków got annexed by the Austrian Empire and became a part of the crown land of Galicia. Austria's rule over the city was very short-lived, however, as just 12 years later it was transferred to the Duchy of Warsaw, a satellite state of Napoleon. When in turn Napoleon was defeated and the question of how to reorder the troubled European continent arose, Kraków was contested between the partitioning powers of Austria, Prussia and Russia. At the Congress of Vienna a compromise was reached, however. Kraków became a free and liberal republic and a kind of buffer zone for a bit over 30 years. In this video we'll take a closer look at this strange and unique episode of Krakow's history, figure out how its political system and its economy worked, and try to make sense of why it came to such a violent end. But before that, a quick word from today's sponsor, World of Warships. World of Warships is a multiplayer game that you can play on your PC right now, for free. The game allows you to step into the role of a true naval commander and guide your ship to victory. There are multiple classes from various nations to choose from, be it battleships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and my personal favourite, the U-boats. What I like most about World of Warships is that the ship's designs are based on actual historical documents and blueprints and not just made up. There are more than 40 unique maps and they all look stunning thanks to the dynamic weather and the amazing water effects. The game never gets boring either, as the devs are constantly working on releasing new and exciting content every single month. This means new ships, new nations, new cosmetics, or even collaborations with Popeye or Godzilla vs Kong for instance. If you don't have a PC, don't worry, as you can also play it on consoles. So, what are you waiting for? Download World of Warships for free using the first link in the description. But wait, there's more. If you use the promo code BRAVO during registration, you will receive a huge starter pack which includes 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, and even a ship. Okay, where was I? Ah yes. The free, independent, strictly neutral city of Kraków was established in 1815 under the common protectorate of its neighbouring empires. Its territory encapsulated the city of Kraków, the smaller towns of Chrzanów, Jebinia and Nowa Góra, on top of more than 200 villages. In total, the Republic controlled a total area of 1,164 square kilometers, which is roughly the size of Hong Kong, and provided a home for 88,000 people. Its population would continuously grow and reach more than 120,000 by 1827. The Republic of Kraków was a direct product of the Napoleonic Wars, as it held onto the Napoleonic Code. This meant that all male citizens were considered equal before the law, that courts were independent, and that all men could freely choose their profession, among other things. Even though German and Yiddish were also spoken, the sole official language was Polish, and as such Kraków became the most important centre for Polish culture and politics by far. This could be seen especially in the prestigious Jagiellonian University, which had the exclusive right to admit students from all parts of former Poland. The university was officially protected by the Russian Tsar in his role as the King of Poland. It didn't remain a free and thriving university for long, as already in 1821 its autonomy was removed completely, out of fear that it might become a gathering place for Polish nationalists and liberal political activists. In 1826, a Russian statesman by the name of Nikolai Novosiltsev was chosen as its curator, which can be interpreted as a sign that the Republic might not have been so free after all. And it really wasn't, because it was under constant supervision by its neighbouring countries, who very often liked to meddle with Krakowian politics. Speaking of politics, let's see how they actually worked. The Republic was led by a president who was elected by an assembly of representatives, who met once per year to discuss the yearly budget, to appoint new judges, and to make sure that everyone was doing their job properly. This assembly was mostly composed of representatives who were elected from each municipality, Of course, as you can imagine, only men with a certain amount of property and with a certain degree of education were allowed to partake in those elections. The very significant Jewish minority was also denied the right of partaking in this political process. Alongside the elected members, there were a number of representatives who were directly appointed by the university, the cathedral chapter, and the Senate. The Senate, in turn, was directly elected by the members of the assembly and held the executive powers as well as the power to initiate new laws. This very unique model of governing was established as part of the Constitution from 1818, written by Prince Adam Jerzy Czartoryski, who would later play an important role during the November Uprising of 1830. Economically speaking, Kraków was in a fantastic place, and some of its citizens managed to get very, very rich. Due to its status as a free trading city without any tolls imposed on any goods going in or out, trade between Kraków and Austria/Russia flourished. The most important trading partner was Russia, however. Kraków mainly exported industrial goods such as minerals, steel and shoes to the Polish areas in the Sardom and received wood and corn in return. However, both Austria and Russia cancelled their free trade agreements only a few years after agreeing to them. This caused a rise of smugglers throughout all layers of society who secretly exported sugar, coffee, cigars and salt to the neighbouring empires. Due to all of these trading activities, whether legal or not, and due to its favourable position, Kraków became one of Europe's cheapest cities to buy goods in. This had one major downside, however. Because Kraków was just constantly being flooded with cheap goods and because trading remained profitable throughout the entire existence of the Republic, there was very little incentive to invest in a functioning manufacturing industry. Even the very few half-hearted efforts made by the government to, for instance, build a cotton workshop simply ended in a disappointing failure. As such, while the citizens definitely got filthy rich, Krakow's economy slowly crumbled away. Of course, many possible investors were scared off by the fact that this republic was just a weird compromise between the partitioning powers that could easily be annexed any single day. Not even the start of the construction of a railway line between Vienna and Kraków in 1844 could kickstart an actual economy. Another interesting aspect of the Kraków Republic was the attempt of assimilating its large Jewish population. The vast majority of Krakow's Jews lived in the Kazimierz district, to the southeast of the old town. Kazimierz used to be its own city, and its Jewish quarter was separated by a stone wall from the Catholic neighborhoods. This meant that the Jewish community developed its own identity and therefore had little to do with their Christian neighbors. Under the short Austrian rule, Kazimierz became a part of Kraków, the wall was finally torn down, and the Jews finally became, theoretically, equal to the Christians. In 1815, a commission spearheaded by an Austrian, a Russian and a Prussian statesman was set up in order to discuss the Republic's legislation towards the Jewish minority. After about 2 years of arguing and discussing, the new statute was finally released in the Gazeta Krakowska. Those new laws had the intention of integrating the Jews into the Krakowian society and to remove their autonomous status. Here's a short list of the most important changes. 1. Jews were considered as equals to everyone else in the city, had to pay the same taxes, and could practice whichever chops they liked. 2. The rabbis were no longer allowed to have a say in political or judicial matters, and they could only fulfill religious duties. 3. To curtail the number of marriages, the required age was raised to 20, and the future husbands had to prove that they were financially secure in front of a government office. 4. Jewish schools were dissolved and all children were sent to Christian ones. Religious schools were still allowed, however. 5. Jews were still only allowed to reside in the Kazimierz area. 6. The Kahal, an autonomous organized structure tasked with taking care of all sorts of administrative things, was abolished. The Jews of the city had the right to obtain Krakowian citizenship if they got familiar with modern customs, showed great leadership, and permanently put away their traditional Jewish garbs. On top of that, depending on their social standing, they had to speak either German or Polish, had to have lived among Christians for 6 years, and promised to send their children to a Polish grammar school. Even if the Krakowian laws were fairly liberal, the Jews living there still had to give up their old customs to be perceived as equals. Now to the big question. Did these assimilation measures work at all? No, absolutely not. Of the about 30,000 Jews, only 136 managed to acquire Krakowian citizenship. This can be explained by the fact that most Jews were still fairly conservatives and liked to hold on to their traditions. On top of that, the pressure of becoming a proper Krakowian was, all things considered, still pretty low. And even if they got their citizenship, they were still not allowed to hold public offices or to sell liquor. Devastating. Under the Republic, no real emancipation of the Jews took place, especially not when compared to Western Europe overall. This was a slow process that needed a few more decades to finally show its results. Let's quickly talk about how Kraków as a city changed. During the early 19th century, it was the informal capital of the partitioned Polish state, and it took that role very seriously. The former royal residence and the Wawel castle inspired many Polish patriots and thus became a symbol for a long-gone era of greatness. This can be seen in the number of extravagant funerals and manifestations that were organized for certain Polish national heroes. In 1817, the body of Józef Antoni Poniatowski was transferred from Warsaw to be buried at the Wawel Cathedral. Poniatowski had fought on Napoleon's side as the commander-in-chief of the Polish troops and lost his life when he was trying to cross the river Elster after the catastrophic defeat at Leipzig. Another big funeral was held 1 year later for Tadeusz Kościuszko, who had fought in the American War of Independence and who had led the Polish Uprising of 1794 after the second partition of Poland. He too got buried at the Wawel Cathedral. What's so special about this is that getting buried at this cathedral was usually an honour reserved only for the Polish kings. But now that there was no Polish king left, these military leaders were considered as a new sort of royalty and as an inspiration for an independent Poland. In 1823, a 34-metre tall hill was built in the west of the city to honour Kościuszko's legacy. Its construction took 3 years and was mostly financed with foreign donations. From the top of this hill you have a wonderful view over all of Kraków, if you're willing to climb it up, that is. All in all, however, not that many architectural examples remain today from the Republic of Kraków. The reason for that is quite simple: they didn't have the funds to build anything fancy. Still, some changes to the city were made. Krakow's medieval fortifications that surrounded the old town were torn down and replaced with a public park. The only parts left of the old city walls are the famous Florian Gate and the Barbakan. Another crucial building that got demolished was the old town hall in the market square. The only thing that remained was its tower. There were plans to build a completely new town hall, but those were never realized. And so this tower just sort of stands there to this day. Several dilapidated churches were also destroyed. One building that actually got improved was the Collegium Maius from the university. It was renovated and received some sort of decorations to restore it to its full glory. Now, in this final chapter, we will talk about why Kraków eventually got annexed by the Austrians. Already in 1833, the partitioning powers imposed a new constitution on Kraków. The enthusiastic participation of many Krakowians during the November Uprising of 1830 had worsened the relationships between the Republic and its neighbours, which led to the city being occupied by Russian troops for a short time. The new constitution severely restricted many of the freedoms that had been granted to Kraków at the Congress of Vienna. Now, the election of the president had to be approved first, and the assembly only got together every 3 years now, instead of every year. Moreover, at the Conference of München-Grätz, Austria, Prussia and Russia agreed to militarily assist each other in case of a Polish rebellion, and to preemptively occupy Kraków when circumstances demanded it. Kraków was considered very dangerous to the partitioning powers, as the city held close contacts to Polish nationalists in exile and harboured many nationalistic organisations. In 1836, the murder of a Russian agent gave a pretense to once again occupy the city. The armies only withdrew 5 years later, but Austrian troops kept a close eye on Kraków from across the Vistula River. So, as you can see, Krakow's internal politics were constantly being meddled with, and after 1833 the annexation of the city was not a question of if, but a question of when. In Kraków during the 1840s a revolt was brewing, and the Austrian authorities were well aware of it. Count Josef von Sedlnitzky, who was the president of the Austrian censorship court, repeatedly stated his fear of illegal patriotic books and pamphlets being smuggled into the Republic. Furthermore, many Polish nobles openly stated their support for an independent Polish nation, and the nationalist societies kept getting more support. The Austrian spy and police network kept warning about the uprising that was about to take place. The police director of Lemberg, for instance, said this in 1845. They, the Polish emissaries, call on the country's inhabitants to sacrifice everything for their fatherland and to prepare for a planned uprising. The French emigration had chosen Galicia and Posen as the focal point of their endeavours and activities, and because of the sympathetic ear it finds, it requires the unceasing vigilance of the government in order to prepare for the approaching storm. Still, the governor of Galicia, Ferdinand Karl von Este, decided to simply ignore these warnings. In his eyes, this potential revolt was nothing to worry about, since it would be difficult for the mostly upper-class revolutionaries to gather the support of the lower-class farmers. In February of 1846, the revolutionaries Ludwik Mierosławski and Karol Liebelt were arrested by the Prussian authorities in Posen. This caused the situation in Kraków to become unusually intense, and so the Austrian troops marched into the city on the 18th of February. However, they received no sympathy from the Republic's population, who immediately began to fight back. After just 2 days, street battles broke out between Austrian troops and the Krakowians, which forced the former to retreat. With them, a part of the Senate also decided to leave, which caused the city to fall to the revolutionaries. Under the rule of dictator Jan Tusowski, the Free Republic was declared. A rebel unit also used the opportunity to occupy Podgórze and Wieliczka. In the meantime, the completely overwhelmed Austrian authorities attempted to get the farmers on their side and to convince them to rise up against the repressive landowning Polish overlords. The nationalists from Kraków also attempted to convince the peasants to join them, but to no avail. The lower classes in Austrian Galicia were surprisingly sympathetic towards the Habsburg Empire, which they believed represented their interests more. They not only didn't care about the restoration of a Polish state, but were outright against it. With some encouragement and financial incentives from the Austrians, a bloodbath erupted in which up to 1,000 landowners, priests and statesmen were killed by insurgent farmers. This particular example shows that Polish nationalistic thoughts were still only popular among a small portion of the population, and that there was no real feeling of national solidarity yet. The farmers also joined the Austrian troops to fight on their side. At the Battle of Gdów, Colonel Ludwig von Benedikt managed to overwhelm the insurgent army and to force them to flee back to Kraków. On the 3rd of March, Austrian, Russian and Prussian troops finally marched into Kraków, which ended the ambitious revolution. Hundreds of rebels were arrested and incarcerated in the Austrian prisons of Kufstein and Spielberg. The dictator Tusowski was arrested by the Prussians, but was soon allowed to start a new life in the US. As a result of the uprising, Austria finally used the opportunity to annex Kraków for good in November of the same year. There was some international protest from the French and the British governments in regards to this violation of the Vienna Congress, but no serious steps were ever taken. And so, for the next 72 years, as part of the Crown Land of Galicia, Kraków would remain an Austrian city. Alright then, dankeschön for watching the video, and I hope you've learned something. If you like my content, then a like and a subscribe would be very much appreciated. An extra big thank you goes out to my generous supporters on Ko-Fi, namely A Cup of Tea, Drix, Tristan Kriegsmann and Ryan Layton. You are a fantastic bunch. Anyway, have a very nice day and see you next time. Oh, you're still here. Once again, if you download World of Warships right now using the first link in the description and enter the promo code BRAVO, you will get a nice free starter pack with 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, and even a ship. So, go ahead. Do it.